got a pretty big backyard that I'm really trying to nativize. Would you say that shrubs and trees are a better investment than flowers?
Yes, yes, they're a lot less work. I mean, there was part of, I said this last time, there's a section of my backyard that was grass, you know, it's the R Zone 40, lot, and it was all grass when I moved in. And there was a certain section, and I tried to put in gardens around, and there was one section of my yard that, was where my children were gonna play sports, ball games of some sort, and they took a prune, so we didn't need that area. So I stopped mowing it, and then I mowed around it and put paths through it and put a concrete plinth with a rabbit on top, make it look intentional. And I just let whatever come, you know, slightly invasives, which we had to rip out. I got a lot of goldenrod, and goldenrod is one of the ones that is really high up there for supporting a lot of our native insects. So that's good. And I was able to put in a few things, you know, black-eyed Susans and Monarda and phlox and things like that. So it's getting a little bit more interesting, a little more diverse. The goldenrod tends to take over, but that's okay too. So sometimes you can just do it that way, but planting little things, they don't have to be big, as long as the deer aren't going to completely devour them. You might put a cage around them. I mean, we have a problem with the deer. You know, buying big plants and a lot of dirt. You know, you pay a lot for that dirt, and the time. But if you can get the smaller ones, they will do. When I first moved into our house, there weren't many plants. I used to get the ones by mail, and they would be the bare root things, and I'd have to drag my poor husband around to look at these sticks. Someday they will be big. You know, it took a while. Now I want to cut them all down because they're the wrong things. But you know, there are different ways of going about it. I wish nurseries would offer more plugs and smaller plants and trays of smaller plants, because if you plant a whole bunch of those, you have a nice stand after a while. But it is expensive. I mean, changing around everything we've done. And the reason why some of the other plants are so inexpensive, you know, if you go to, you know, some of the big box stores and you can buy plants, is because those things are really easy to grow. And they've had many years of cultivation to get them to that point, and they've winnowed out the ones that are problematic. And we're still learning how to grow some of our native plants. And some of our native plants also need some mycorrhiza connections with the fungi, and they need certain things that, you know, are not necessarily in our garden soil. So there's still a lot of learning on our part as to what works. But I think those silky dogwoods, they're easy, and they're from around here. So if you've got an area, put them in. And some of them you can do on root cutting. So you can take a cutting at certain times of year, put in the root hormone, put them in, you know, in a pot, water them, and get the roots established, and then put them out. I mean, there are different ways of going about it. And
could you do that with pinkster? Because I have pinksters way in the back. I'd like to have more of them.
I don't know.
You can layer them.
You can layer, yes. Yeah, with the rhododendrons, you can take a branch and scrape off just a little bit of the outer bark and layer them, pin them down, and put some, you know, leaf mulch over top. They will root. The rhododendrons are good at doing that. Yeah.
So Prairie Moon Nursery, have you ever heard of that?
Yes.
You can buy trays of plugs from them,
Yeah.
and they're a good company.
Yeah. Yeah. They're in Pennsylvania.
So one thing you have to be careful about that is they're in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So whenever you're buying online, especially just check where it is and make sure that they do carry plants that are native here, but not everything is. Or their Liatris is what a good example, Blazing Star. They have different versions of it.
Yeah.
One of which is native here, one of which is native in the Midwest. So it's just a matter of being careful.
And what you want to try to do is get the ones that are from as close to around here as possible. You know, it's a balance between close to around here as possible or from China. So you want the ones from around here because they have the genotype that tells them when to bloom, and you know they're tied in with our local timings and the system. So they've got their own little genotype. So you know sometimes you can get theirs, you know, only collected from, you know, a few yards away from your house. But it's still better, I think, to plant the ones that are from the regions, but sometimes if you get the ones from the Midwest, those are their plants rather than our plants. So if you can get a local nursery that sources locally, even better.
Talk about native-ar and cultivar.
Lisa, help me out. Native-ar is sort of like, it's a nice plant, they might have, it might have been from somewhere else, and it's a lovely plant, and it's native, but it wasn't really from around here, but it's a nice expression of that plant. And the cultivar, they've crossbred it with something else to make it even more special. The flowers are bigger, there are more blooms, they've done some genetic, hybridizing to make it special.
Yeah, the native R's might just have been selected for specific characteristics. So there's a lot of talk about whether or not native R's are as valuable as natives. And there's no easy answer because it depends on the plant and depends on what they've selected for. For example, if it's flower size or shape or color or leaf color.
Yeah. So and one of the things we don't want to do is get cuttings of the same plant and plant it everywhere, so that you have sort of the same, you're planting the same genetic plant everywhere. I don't know if you've ever read the book by Michael Pollan, The Botany of Desire. There's a great chapter on apples, and one of the things I learned was that Johnny Appleseed was a Swedenist, and the Swedenists did not believe in grafting trees. When you graft a tree, you're simply making a copy of it. They thought that went against God's will. And so what Johnny Appleseed did, he planted seeds. And when he planted the apple seeds, the genetic expression of whatever that seed was came up. And so you get all sorts of varieties of apples. That does lead to a better, healthier environment when you have that genetic diversity in the plants. And plants have a lot of genetic diversity. And so if the climate got warmer or colder or drier or wetter, some of them are going to survive. If they're all the same kind and they don't survive one of those conditions, they're all going to die. So you want to have, and that's really how nature did it to ensure that things survived, you had that genetic diversity. Yeah.
Just as a note, Botany of Desire is coming to Real Art Ways as a movie with
that's right.
talk afterwards.
Yeah.
So I think it's coming up this week or next week.
It's a great book. It's only got 4 chapters, one about tulips, one about potatoes, one about apples, and one about marijuana. Great book called Let Make Us Do Things. But yeah, there's so many lovely books out there, that a lot of interesting things. And it's getting us thinking about how things work and how things are connected. I know I serve on the Simsbury Land Trust Board, and we're trying to get people to realize that, even though we're preserving these various areas, what's in your yard gets into our preserves. An awful lot of the Japanese barberry gets into our preserves. It's really hard and expensive to remove. But we'd love it if you planted something good in your yards, and then that would come into our wild areas. And your yard is like with the pollinator pathway. Your yard connects from your yard to the neighbor's yard to the neighbor's yard to our wild areas. The wild areas can't do it alone. Was it E.O. Wilson, I think was up last night, that we need half of our land to be native or not, for wildlife. And right now, I think the goal in Connecticut is 20%, 21% by 2023.
Is that like 70%?
Yeah, well, yeah, 70% native plants in our yard would be a nice goal to do. You can still have, if you have, real, soft spot for a certain plant, you can put them out, but not the whole thing. Try to, bring in a little more diversity to your yards. Yeah.
I wonder if you could speak about the oak trees in our property, since you're on the land trust. We noticed a sign up saying that for a couple months, they're going to be treating for the spongy moth.
Yeah.
And which is disturbing to know that the oak trees, have this problem, but I'm wondering how severe that is and, how much of it they
From what I
eradicate.
understand, the spongy moth is what used to be called the gypsy moth. It's now being called the spongy moth. It's a non-native plant, non-native insect. And it's especially bad during drought years, because it's kept in check by the bacteria that thrives during wet years. So in our droughts, we've had a lot of areas in Connecticut that have been hard hit by the spongy moth, defoliating the trees and stressing them out on top of the drought. And some of our oak trees have died. The Tuller woodlot, I mean, we just have, the Simsbury Land Trust just has the development rights to that property, but that is a woodlot. That is part of the farm. It was designated not as a forest, but as a woodlot, and Don Tuller does harvest those trees from time to time, and I know he was harvesting the oaks because they were killed by the spongy moth.
Oh, that isn't part of the land
No,
trust,
no,
that
we
area.
just have the development rights to keep that as a farm. Yeah, but that is designated as a woodlot, and he gets a forest manager account for that, yeah.
You mentioned chestnuts earlier. I know that they're developing chestnuts that are supposed to be resistant
Yeah.
to some of the blight. What's
Yeah.
your opinion on that? Is it something you want in the area or people want
Absolutely,
it?
absolutely. In certain parts of the country, the chestnut used to be the dominant tree. It had a wonderful nut crop, and it was more consistent than the oak mast crop. It was a great pollinator. It was wind pollinated, but it was a great, supported a lot of different insects. And then when the fungus came that wiped out the chestnut trees, didn't wipe them all out, but a lot of them were cut down prematurely just to get the wood. And there is the Chestnut Foundation, which is trying to bring the chestnut tree back. Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station has been doing a lot of work trying to back cross with I think it's the Chinese chestnut, which has the gene to protect itself from the fungi. We still have a lot of rootstock that is still alive from the chestnut tree, but it would be a great tree to reintroduce into our woodlands, because we're losing an awful lot of our trees. We've lost the ash, the hemlocks are being attacked by the woolly adelgid. That's sort of a little bit better than it was. The elm tree was under attack. We've brought in back more resistant elm trees, but it takes an awful lot of time to breed that resistance into them and do the back crossing, because the trees live so long and we don't live like they do. So I know at the Simsbury Land Trust and the Tannergy Hill property, we are going to be working with the Connecticut Chestnut Foundation. They're going to be planting this spring some chestnuts, and we're going to have a sign up talking about how we're part of that process. They're looking for people. If any of you have properties, you can contact Connecticut Chestnut Foundation and say, if you'd like to have a chestnut plantation on your property, and there's an arrangement, they can come in and do the cross-pollination with the trees. So yeah, we're looking forward to working with them. We're putting them in a field that unfortunately has not only brambles, but a little bit of oriental bittersweet in it. So, you know, it's one of those things, we want the chestnut trees, but we've got these awful invasives. So it's tricky, but I think we all, you know, bringing them back would be great. Actually, there's a lot of work trying to put the chestnut trees in the strip mines down in, along the Appalachian. That was where their home range was, around the Appalachian. They grow really well in the spoils of the strip mine. Guess that's a plus. And there's also some, eventually there might be some work with CRISPR to try to get, insert the gene, but there's been some controversy about that. But it's an interesting, it was a fascinating tree. I know there's a book up here all about the history of the American chestnut tree. It was very important to our early colony and early development of New England. It was a great, great tree, fast growing. Down in the Appalachian, there were ones that were so big. You see pictures of them. They were called the redwoods of the East Coast because they were so massive, and the wood was rot resistant and easy to work with, and it'd be lovely to get that tree back.
So Connecticut Chestnut Foundation?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
I have a quick question about, burning bush.
Oh.
I know. I have some in my yard, and they've been there for 40 years. If I put them flush to the ground, am I have to kill them?
I
Or
hope
will it
so.
just-
If it comes to the ground, I think I've said this before, you should never let a good growth go to waste. When the plants are stressed, that's a great time to cut them. So, yeah, cause they're already struggling, although I don't know if burning bushes struggle. But cut it, they are easier to kill than some of the other ones. If you cut barberry down, they'll just resprout. I don't really think the burning bush should resprout. But the problem, when you cut them down, there will be such a lovely seed bed underneath that they will be constantly coming up over the years, and you have to keep pulling them up. So it's not a one and done, you have to, you know, keep after the seedlings. But yeah, cut it down. Yes. Yes.
So you have mentioned about planting plants that are native specifically to our area, but in this time of global warming, should we be considering trying to introduce some plants that naturally grow a little further south in anticipation that our habitat might be, it wouldn't be a good place for some of the trees and bushes that currently grow in Connecticut?
So here's how I would
When it's
answer.
warmer.
When the genome study was done for, you know, people, they felt, the scientists thought they tried something easy first, and they tried rice. And then they found out that rice has many more genes than we do. Plants have to have a lot of different genes that they may not use at the moment, because unlike animals who don't, if they don't like a particular environment, they can leave. So they don't have to have as many tricks as the plants do. So the plants have a wide genetic diversity already. Some of them are expressing the ones for this area, the ones that are surviving here, but their seeds would have that potential to survive wherever. I would argue that we have a wide range on some of these plants anyway. I mean, the maples will grow all the way up to, you know, if you look at the range for these plants, they are from Nova Scotia down to Maryland. I mean, some of them, you know, they go east and west. They already have a good genetic diversity. And I would say that and the climate is always changing, as it changes, these plants have adapted. I mean, back in the 1900s, the 1800s, we were coming out of the Dalton minimum, a little ice age, and the plants were doing fine. So yeah, plants are always being stressed, and some individuals are doing better than others, and that's why I think I side with Johnny Appleseed, you know, John Chapman, that we want the natives, and the ones that are going to survive are the ones that are going to be surviving. Insects can reproduce so quickly they will adapt, but they are still adapted to those particular species. You know, if you bring in the southern species, that's not necessarily going to support our native insects, unless then you start bringing in the insects, and you know, it gets awful complicated. But I think I have more faith in nature, that it's been going through these cycles, you know, many times, and the plants have adapted to that. I mean, you think 12,000 years, 16,000 years ago, we were under ice. You know, it works. Nature will find a way, if we give enough space and stop bringing in stuff from around the world that's not supposed to be here. So I have faith in our plants.
Anybody else? Okay, well, first of all, I just want to say, when I grow up, I want to know everything that you A couple of things, just to echo, just a reminder about the goldenrod. What makes you sneeze? Ragweed, right, not the goldenrod. When my grandmother was a Mainer, and I think one of her favorite phrases really fits a lot of what we've been talking about tonight and the other times that we've been here. And that is, her favorite phrase was, possess thy soul in patience. And I think that applies here, in that, you know, this isn't something that we can do immediately. I mean, we have all these great suggestions, there's research out there, all that stuff, but we need to be aggressively patient, if that makes sense. Like, let's do this, but let's do this well. And part of that means thinking through your yard, taking these suggestions, taking them home, getting rid of your burning bushes, you know, doing all these things, what comes first. And that's one of the things that we've been trying to help with through all of these seminars. So I think that also extends to be patient about planting. I know that in my yard, because I didn't know a lot of what I now know, which is still not enough, you know, I planted things that weren't native, and, because they were pretty. And I think that applies to a lot of what we're talking about as well, is that, you know, we still wanna go to the nurseries and like, ooh, that's, you know, it's blooming, it's pretty, it's that kind of thing. I mean, we have to change how we look at things. And we also have to ask our nurseries to be different too. We have to ask our garden centers to be different. And if there are cultivars, and we know that that's not the direction we wanna go, if there are plants that, don't buy them, you know, and ask for the other things, ask them. You know, we have people like Lisa and, you know, the things that were listed here that are doing this, but we want more than that. And some of that rests on us, to go to places and say, you know, first of all, not buying from a big box, you know, buy from local places and ask them, tell them, this is what you want. This is what you want, and this is what's gonna make a difference. Because that's a way you can help. In addition to doing this in your yard, simply going and saying, we want this, this is important, and encourage the response. So, and possess thy soul in patience, because this takes a while. So, thank you very much. We will be back on the 3rd.